welcome to another episode of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You can find us online at thepreparednesspodcast.com. My name is Rob Hannes, and I'm the host for the show. You can email me at rob@prepcast.info. There's a couple things I want to cover in this episode of the podcast. Before we get to that, though, I just want to ask you if you have had any issues downloading the podcast or getting the podcast file or accessing it or getting it in your RSS feed or in iTunes or whatever. Drop me a line at rob@prepcast.info and just let me know what the issue was, if you were able to resolve it or if you had to go another way to get the podcast file. There is a standardized XML file that contains all the information for all these podcasts. And I just want to make sure that if you're having issues, if I can fix it somehow, I'd like to know. Also, if you haven't signed up for the weekly tips, you can do that by going to the website. You'll see a subscribe to the weekly prep tip logo or banner up on the left-hand side, right below the listener survey, which I would also invite you to do if you haven't done that yet. The weekly tips is a weekly tip. It's a article length tip that allows me to kind of go into preparedness a little bit more on a specific topic, and the listener survey gives us feedback. It's completely anonymous so that you can tell us how you really feel. We've gotten a lot of feedback, and I have to say that the vast majority is overwhelmingly positive, so thank you for the feedback. I really appreciate that. That helps me know what you like, what you don't like, and I can kind of refocus the podcast and make sure that I'm staying on target. Okay, what else do we have going on here? The Preparedness Podcast forum. Again, I've neglected to keep bringing that up and reminding you, but we're getting more activity on there, so I'd like you to check it out. We've got some good tips going on there. We got a good bunch of people that are providing information and asking questions, and it's another avenue for you to kind of either share your knowledge, or if you have a question on like, hey, how do you guys do this, or how do you suggest I do this, or what's the best way to do this, it's a really good venue for that. So why don't you give it a try, and you can again get to that through the website. During this podcast, the topics I wanted to cover, I call them prepping commonalities, which is kind of doesn't really mean much unless you understand what I'm talking about, and it's not a difficult subject. It's just there are some very common elements to preparing that will cover nearly every disaster, and those are the ones that you should be working on first. And I also want to cover I have this system called Fast Packs, and I haven't covered that yet, and not going to be covering it this podcast, but there's a few bags that I guess I could say I rediscovered, and I'll get into that when I cover that and explain what that means. But before I do, I want to go ahead and take care of the first sponsor, which is FlyingEagleGold.com. Hi folks, Rob Hannes here from the Preparedness Podcast. When you get to the financial portion of your preparedness plan and you start looking at ways that you can save the value of your savings, you're going to realize that there's only one real answer, and that's gold and silver. While a lot of people, including myself, call this an investment to be able to buy gold and silver to protect your savings, it's not really an investment. What you're doing is you're protecting the value of your money from inflation and from the erosion of the dollar. And it's important that you act now, because the dollar can still buy reasonable amounts of gold and silver for relatively cheap. As inflation increases, you're going to see the dollar be able to buy less and less. When the price of gold goes up, when the price of silver goes up, that's what this means. It's not because gold's getting more expensive. It's because the dollar doesn't buy as much as it used to. We see this happen every day with food and fuel. It's no different with gold and silver. For more information on why gold and silver is a good idea for your preparedness plan, head on over to FlyingEagleGold.com and check out all the information that Jeff has on his site. On there, you'll find historical examples and references of why this is something you really need to consider. And when you're ready to make your purchase, give Jeff a call. He's going to help you out. FlyingEagleGold.com. Okay, so the first thing that I want to cover is this prepping commonalities. You should have noticed by now, if you've been preparing, that there is a lot of overlap when you're trying to get prepared for a large variety of events that can happen, whether they're earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, chemical spill, general evacuation, whatever. There is a lot of that is you're going to find that there's a lot of the same sort of issues that you're dealing with to prepare. And I hope that you haven't gone through every event and started listing all the food you would need for tornadoes, and then listing all the food and water and shelter things you would need for a hurricane or a wildfire or whatever. I'm hoping that you have discovered that there's a lot of commonalities here, and it's these common things that you should be focusing on first, because these are the basic things that you need in order to survive. Things that aren't a common need for survival, in other words, food. Food is one of those things that you need almost any event. At some point, you're going to need food because we need energy. And even though we can last in maybe a month without eating, it's not a very pleasant month, and you're going to be continually getting weak, and you're inviting disease and weakness, and with weakness can come injury. And so food is very important, just as is water. So those things that aren't common or require specialized equipment, these are the things that you shouldn't worry about until you have covered the basics. And the basics are, again, these common elements, because it's these basics that give you the ability to survive through most events. So, for example, if we look at a tornado, we had a tornado in Joplin, Missouri not that long ago. I think it was only a couple years ago, and it wiped out most of the town, or a good portion of the town. A lot of people were without shelter. They needed protection from the elements, the rain, the cold, the wind. They needed food. They needed water. They needed to be able to cook food. They needed to be able to go to the bathroom. They needed to be able to wash, take care of themselves, get clean. A lot of those people needed prescriptions. They needed first aid. When it got dark, because there were no street lights or electricity, they needed light. Now, I just covered all the basic elements that you should be looking at as the core, or the things that you start with. So if you're on a budget, or you're sitting there because you're a newbie, you're just getting to preparedness and you're overwhelmed, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that I need to prepare for. Where do I start? Where do I begin? Because there's so much that I'm thinking about. I'm having a hard time prioritizing this stuff. Well, this is how you should prioritize it, because these are the things that you're going to need almost always. Now, don't worry about going back to the podcast to write it down. I'll have this short list in the show notes. Not surprisingly, though, these common elements are found in the first tier of the survival hierarchy of needs that I talked about in episode 115. Air was also on that tier, and it should be in this list as well, because it's certainly something that we all need to live. However, being able to provide clean air to breathe on an ongoing basis really kind of falls under a special category, because, luckily, we don't typically have to worry about our air supply for most disasters. True, yes, there are some disasters that we would prefer to have filtered air. Anytime there's a building collapse, like the terrorist attacks of 9/11, any sort of wildfire with the particulate smoke particles, masks can help, but usually we don't have to worry about those things. And it would be fairly easy to include an N95 mask in your everyday carry, or your backpack, or your office desk drawer, along with the other survival supplies or prep supplies that you have in your office or where you work, just in case you do need them. And that's certainly not a very complicated prep. What I was referring to was, for example, in a pandemic or a biological attack, you're going to need a steady supply of N100 masks anytime you're out and about. And depending on the severity of the situation, you may need to create a safe room and put a positive pressure on that room with filtered air using a HEPA air filter. So that is a specialized category that would not be part of your common list of things to do for preps. Now, I would also include navigation and signaling in this list of common needs. You don't generally need to, find your way around or have a compass after a tornado or an earthquake, although sometimes the damage can be bad enough that your local markers, the landmarks that you use to navigate streets and know where to turn, a lot of that can be destroyed. So you may very well need a compass and a map to know kind of where you're at. However, I was thinking along the lines of getting stranded or lost in the wilderness, because remember, being prepared isn't just about the big, massive Armageddon cataclysmic catastrophe at the end of the world. It's mostly about everyday emergencies. So if you're a camper or a hiker, if you like to, or if you have an ATV and you like to go tooling around the woods, or if your job takes you on far away, out of the way places, like if you're a power line inspector or something like that, you definitely want to be able to have a way to signal and navigate out of there. That would definitely be something that would be a common need and very likely to be needed if you were stranded or lost or your car broke down someplace. It's occurred to me that I keep talking about a preparedness plan, and I can't recall actually having talked about creating a preparedness plan. So I think I'm going to work on an upcoming podcast for this. So I don't want to say when it will be or promise it's coming out, because every time I do, it seems that something happens, my time schedule changes or whatever, and I can't get to what it is. For example, the spouse show. Yes, I know it is coming. Trust me, it is coming. However, my wife took a part-time job, and with me working and running this business and her working and helping run this business, as well as our family, and now it's holidays, we feel kind of guilty not having gotten this spouse show out yet, but we will do it. I do promise we will do it. I just can't say when, even though it's kind of been something that's on our mind and something we've been trying to do. It really comes down to having the time. So I don't want to say when the show I'm making, a preparedness plan, is going to come out, but it will probably be soon, because if you listen to the podcast where I had Fred on from the Preparedness 101 meetup group, he actually does an entire class on putting together a preparedness plan, and that is one of the topics that I know he is going to be covering in an upcoming podcast as well. So not only are we going to cover it with Fred, but it's something that I want to cover either just before or just after, so that you have a couple of different perspectives, different viewpoints on putting a plan together. Because I always think it's very important to get more than one viewpoint, because I think that's what makes us stronger and more educated. Okay, so I feel I've kind of meandered here a little bit. Let's get back on track. Once you have a good stock of these common needs, then it's time to start considering those events that would require specialty items. Now, all I mean by specialty is that its use is fairly confined to a few or possibly even a single type of event. For example, radiation meters. They're really only good for measuring radiation. Most disaster events don't involve any radiation whatsoever, and you wouldn't need a Geiger counter or a war meter, as it's called. But there are other events that do require specialized preps, and here is a quick and short list of things that I came up with just as an example of what I'm talking about. The first thing I have on the list, I've kind of sort of covered, and that's pandemics and biological attacks. This involves viruses that invade the system, or our system, make us very sick and can kill us. you need to be able to protect yourself from getting contaminated from these viruses. That requires N100 masks. N95s really aren't going to cut it. You could use them. It's better than nothing, but I prefer the N100s. You also may want to create a safe room within your house that is pressurized with a HEPA air filter. That's not something that you're typically going to be able to use for anything else other than those things. Economic collapse, that requires the acquisition of gold and silver, extra supplies for barter. You probably want to have farmland if you don't already live on a farm. And you're going to want to make some very wise investments if you've got the capital to be able to do so, other than, the common stock market and money markets and hedge funds and stuff, because that stuff will probably crash. You're going to want to be a lot smarter than that with your investments. So again, not something that's common to every disaster. EMP, nuclear war, dirty bombs, nuclear power plant meltdowns, these are highly specialized. You're going to need things like radiation meters. These include the low-level meters as well as the high-level meters, dosimeters and a dosimeter charger, potassium iodide and iodate tablets, especially for younger children, decontamination gear. Now, if you don't know, if what I'm saying isn't familiar, if you don't understand what it is, that's a big clue that it's specialized. You wouldn't need any of this gear except for most of it for anything that has to do with radiation. Now, EMP doesn't involve radiation. You can learn a lot about the EMP and how to protect yourself against EMP by either going to the website and searching for all the EMP information that I've put out. There's a ton of articles and posts on the website, or downloading the book that I have on Kindle. If you go to Amazon and you search for Preparedness Podcast, you'll see the book there. It's called the Preparedness Podcast Mini Guide, Surviving EMP, and that's basically I've taken all the information that I've researched and tested, and I put into an ebook. And you can get all the information there. That's a very specialized form of preparation. Now, decontamination gear, you could use that for pandemics, biological attacks, anywhere you would have fallout, radioactive fallout on you, as well as chemical. Although the decontamination varies slightly between whether it's a chemical or biological agent and a radiological agent, but still you would need decontamination gear. And of course, yes, there are several events there you could use that gear for, but it's not part of the common set. Decking of chemical attacks, if that's something you wanted to be prepared for, you would need a protective suit, a mask, decon gear. You would need some sort of way to detect the chemical, which chemical you're talking about. Now, this is a good point to bring up right now. You don't specifically have to prepare for these special events or these special category events if you don't want to. A lot of people don't because they can get very expensive. I don't make any preparation whatsoever for a chemical attack. I used to really get concerned about them, really kind of stress out over them. But as I learned more, and particularly this was when I was in the Marine Corps, you learn that the chemical attack is a highly focused area. The chemicals don't last that long. And typically, unless you're carrying your protective suit and your mask with you all the time, you're not going to have the time to actually don any of this stuff. It's not like you can stop the car, run around to the back of the vehicle, open up the trunk or the back and pull this stuff out and start to put it on. That takes way too long. If you're in a chemical attack, you're in it, and there's not much you can do about it. Now, that isn't to say that you can't be prepared for that if that's something you want to prepare for, but definitely a special category. Threats against the person. This includes armed conflict, riots, looting, war, urban violence, home invasion, personal crimes. You need to have an awareness, which doesn't cost anything, but physical assets are like a hardened home, defensive tools like guns, training, stuff like that. I mean, again, specialized categories. I do think this is something you should make part of your preparedness plan and deal with these sort of issues, but you're going to have not as much of a need for this as those other common things. So again, focus on the common things first. Fuel shortages is another specialty category, and it's not that you can't store gas fairly easily, but you need to store it safely. And honestly, there aren't that many fuel storage containers that you can use that are safe as far as I'm concerned. Plus, you've got a lot of laws that you have to deal with depending on where you live. You may not even be able to store any. And the last thing I have on my list, which doesn't mean that these are the only things that would fall under a special category, but just to throw some out there, is basically any scenario that involves a long-term power outage. You're pretty much going to need everything needed to keep living, however you define that. If you're on a farm and have a well and you need a certain amount of electrical gear to keep that well running, as well as other farm gear or keep the tractor running, you need spare parts and fuel. That is highly specialized scenario. You're going to need way more than just a common 2-4 months worth of equipment and supplies. So these are just a few of the specialized categories that I could think of. And I wouldn't really consider these right now if you're beginning to be prepared. Even if you've been a prepper for a while, I would definitely make sure that you have all the common elements: food and cooking, water, shelter, fire and warmth, sanitation and personal care, first aid and needed prescriptions, light, and navigation and signaling. Make sure you have those covered first and covered well. Make sure you can go, a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 months with that before you start considering the stuff in the special categories. The next topic I want to cover, I'm not really sure what to call these. I've called them utility bags. I've called them fast packs or utility fast packs. I'm not really sure. I know what to call them specifically. They're a cordage bag, a stake bag, and a tarp bag. But I would probably consider these to be part of my fast pack system, which is nothing but a series of bug out bags or evacuation bags. 2 of these bags I've had for well over a decade. I don't even remember how long I've had them. I've had the bags for about as long as I can remember using them, but I know I haven't had them forever. So we'll just say over a decade. And that would be the cordage bag and the stake bag. The tarp bag I haven't actually put together yet, but I have everything I want to put in there. I just haven't done it yet. But we're going to cover these. And the reason I decided to go over this is because I was going through my garage and I'm moving these 2 bags. And every time I move these bags, you identify what they are. And I'm like, hey, that would be kind of a neat topic, because these are 2 bags. And actually with the tarp bag there'd be 3 bags, because I always grab tarps when I go camping or out to the field. But I always grab my cordage bag, my stake bag, and I always grab the tarps and that sort of sheltering material when I go to the field or camping or anything like that, because they're so useful. So it's one of those things that I didn't really consider. It's not like in the forefront of my prep list at all, but it's something I've always grabbed. And so I just said I'm going to go ahead and talk about these here because I find them highly useful. So the first bag is the cordage bag. And this is a medium-sized duffel. And I've got pictures of this. Last night I took pictures of both of these bags along with the bag that they're carried in, just so you could get a size reference. And in there, I contain what I basically call cordage. So, for example, I have bungee cords of assorted sizes. Mostly these are the rubber type. I have a few that are the elastic cord type. Now, used to have a big problem trying to pull out a bungee cord, and they got the S-hooks on there that always grab everything. It's always a pain to try to undo everything. So what I've done lately is I've taken all the S-hooks off of the bungee cords, and I store them in a plastic bag, which isn't going to last too long. So I probably need to get a little nylon Cordura bag that zips shut and stuff. But since there isn't a lot of abrasion or a lot of scruffing that goes on with the bag, it's lasted fairly well. Anyways, all the S hooks are off the bungee cord. So when I want a bungee cord, I take whatever cords I want and the appropriate amount of hooks, and I just stick them back on. This prevents all the confusion or the chaos that, it's like pulling up Christmas lights. You wrap them up and you throw them away at the end of the season, and next season you pull them out and it's this big knotted mass of cords and wires. That prevents this. Also in there are some utility cords, some nylon utility cord, and these are on plastic spools, kind of like little kite spools where, they're flat. I got these at I think Lowe's or Home Depot. They're just the braided utility cord. They're not parachute cord. They're not designed for, hauling weight or climbing or anything like that. They're thin, maybe, 3 or 4 millimeters thick. But it's highly useful cordage, and it comes in this little plastic bracket. It's like a flat spool that you can wrap it around. Highly useful, and they come in different colors. So I only had blue because the other stuff I had, I think, was purple or yellow. I can't remember. It got used up during something, or I forgot it someplace. So I need to replace it. But having different colors allows you to be able to mark different areas. But this stuff is cheap, and it's easy to use and easy to wrap up. I also have ball bungees, which I find to be extremely useful for lashing like tarps to either an easy up or some sort of structure or whatever. If you don't know what ball bungees are, you can take a look at the picture on the show notes, but it's basically a plastic ball that's got a loop of elastic in it, and you wrap it around and you flip the ball into the last part of the loop, and the tension keeps it there. Highly useful, again, especially for lashing tarps. So, for example, if I take 2 easy ups and I stick them side by side, easy ups are great shelter. They're easy to put up. They're good in the rain, except when you put 2 side by side, you've got that centerpiece, and what happens is the rain is directed right down in there, and you've got this wall of water splitting your shelter in half. So I have a 12 by 24 tarp, and I put over both of these easy ups, and I use the ball bungees to attach the tarp to the easy up frame. It's very quick and easy. It makes it very secure, and they're very easy to undo as well. So I'm not taking straight line bungee cords that have the S-hooks on there and stretching them and trying to find a way to anchor those bungee cords. The ball bungees allow me to directly attach the tarp to the frame of the easy up. So very handy there. Other things I have in the bag is some pieces of coarse rope. I need to get some more of this sort of rope. It's kind of like thick twine, much thicker than twine, but it's not a heavy. It's not a heavy duty rope or a heavy gauge rope. It's just like thick twine. It's very useful for lashing down, and because it's so cheap and expedient, if you have to cut it, it's okay. Just go ahead and cut it. I've got some ratchet tie-down straps. I've got 4 of those. These are really great if you're going to lash down loads in the back of a pickup truck, or moving something heavy like a bed frame or a dresser. You want to tie that down. Very handy to have those. I've got an elastic cargo net, and it's got these plastic hooks on them. Again, I removed them because, again, they're so easy to put on, and such a pain when they're kind of stuck in the bag that it's easier just to pull them off. And the last thing I have in my cordage bag is nylon-coated steel cable, and this is actually a dog runner. So what we did is we would hang this up between 2 trees, and then there was a little pulley that rode along that cable that was up, and that got attached to the dog, so the dog was able to walk around and move around without actually having to get tied up or wrapped around, or have that rope or that leash or that cord drag along the ground and knock things over and trip people and stuff. I prefer that far better than the ground cable. Now, I've used this cordage bag for many years. I bring it with me all the time, like I mentioned. There are some things I'd like to add, though. parachute cord. Now, I usually have parachute cord in other bags, like my other go bags or my main fast pack that I always take. There's plenty of cordage in there, or parachute cord in there. But I probably should add some to this bag specifically. I would like to add some more nylon straps and quick detach buckles. The little Fastex buckles. Those would be quite handy. Should add some more rope of varying sizes and types. I really want to add more twine, the nylon twine, the jute twine, which is the common brown stuff, and cotton. All three are very useful for different things. The cotton can be used for wicks and for tying food together when you're cooking. I wouldn't want to use jute for that, or the nylon. But that stuff's cheap and it's expendable, so there's no reason to have a good amount of that. Carabiners and snap clips. Again, I usually have this in other bags, but I should have a good amount in this one. In fact, this is the thought that just occurred to me. I've got snap clips and carabiners, and not necessarily the mountain climbing or the rappelling carabiners. I mean, I have those, but these aren't the ones I'm talking about. I'm not talking the ones rated for climbing. I'm just talking about the snap hooks that you can buy at the hardware store. They're great for attaching to a rope and using as a way to hook things on, or to wrap around the tree and clip it onto itself, or a really quick way to attach it to the tree. It just occurred to me, I've got all these snap hooks and stuff laying around, and I'm always finding them in one place or another. And up until now, I've always wondered where I can put them to keep track of them, and now I know, because this is the bag they should go into. I don't know why it just occurred to me, but there you go. I should probably mention that a lot of the items I'm talking about here you can find on campingsurvival.com, and if you use the coupon code PREPCAST, all one word, PREPCAST, PREPCAST, you can get an extra 5% off your order. The second bag that I always grab when I go out to the field or camping is the steak bag. Pounding steaks here in the Arizona dirt is always a challenge, because it's so hard and it's so difficult to get a steak in there without either bending it or hitting a rock or not ruining the steak as you're trying to pound it into the near concrete like dirt that we have here. So in general, I try not to use steaks if I can get away with not needing them. So for the steak bag, I have a military heavy canvas bag. I think it's a mechanic's bag. This is not the short one. This is kind of the longer one. Again, I've got a picture of this. It'll be in the show notes. I've got 8 construction stakes in. These are heavy iron stakes. They're about a foot, maybe 11 inches long. They've got holes drilled in them. I think they use them for holding the rebar mesh when they're pouring concrete and stuff. Anyways, they're really tough stakes. They're great to use with a sledgehammer or even just a regular hammer. And they're wonderful in this Arizona dirt because they're very tough. It'd be very difficult to actually bend these things. Of course, they are extremely heavy, so as much as I'd love to be able to carry like 24 of these things, I only carry 8 because that's about as much weight as I can handle in this bag. I also have some military tent stakes. I've got 12 long, 6 short, and I don't particularly have those numbers for any other reason other than that was probably what I had, or it was just convenient to have those. Some of these are bent simply because, again, trying to pound in this dirt, you go about 4 inches or 3 inches and you hit a rock, and you're not sure if you hit the rock or if it's just tough dirt, so you hit it, and next thing you know, the thing's bent. I have about 9 nail stakes, or that's what I call these. These are aluminum, but they look like giant nails. I like these a lot because they're a little bit smaller. They can typically penetrate this area of dirt much easier. The ones I have like a red inverted cone on them, and that's so that the cordage that you tie them doesn't slip off. These break quite easily, and one of the things I want to get are some heavy washers that I can put on these, and they'll be stopped by the little head that's there. That'd be much easier because they're metal. They won't break as much. I got a couple pieces of short rebar, which again are just metal stakes if I need something really strong. And Actually, I would probably use these expendably because I got them for free, and if I lost them, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I've got some hammers. I've got your typical metal carpentry hammer. I've got a plastic hammer, which I use for the lighter weight steaks. I also have, I'm not really sure what to call it. It's like a utility hammer. It's got a crowbar on the top, a flat hammer on one side, and like a hatchet head on the other side. It's not a particularly useful tool. It doesn't keep an edge very well, but you can bang on it, and if I ruined it or I lost it, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It's not pig iron. It's better than that, but I wouldn't call it a high-quality tool. But again, it works. It works pretty well for just banging in steaks. I've got some heavy gauge wire in there, and I use this with the construction stakes. It fits in the little holes that are drilled in those stakes, and it keeps the cordage that I wrap around that stake from sliding off. Now, the stakes are pretty rough, and the cordage doesn't come off very easily. But if it's very windy and a tent's flapping or tarp's flapping, there can get slack on that, and it can work its way off. So I put the wire on there to help prevent that. Plus, you can use the wire to help pull the stake up because you can get a little bit of a, well, actually, this is what I think I use the rebar for, is I put the rebar in that wire and I can pull up and get a little bit better grip on that stake if I need to. Last two items I have in the bag currently are some lightweight camping stakes. These are, you can't necessarily bend them with your hand, but they're very easy to bend by pounding into the dirt with a hammer. I have them just because they're lightweight and they don't take up any room, and why not? And I also have some work gloves because working with the stakes and stuff can get pretty rough on your hands. Now, some of the things that I need to add, I don't know why I don't have more heavy wire. I think I did, but I take a guess that maybe the kids lost it the last time we were camping, but shh, don't tell them I know. I would like to add some more of those nail stakes or those spike stakes. They're very handy. They're very lightweight. I find them quite useful for a variety of things. I don't have any currently, but some of the plastic stakes can be quite useful. They're not particularly great here in the Arizona desert or even up north because the soil is just terrible. It really chews them up and they're easy to break. The plastic stakes don't bend, so when they meet resistance and you're still pounding on them, they tend to just break and then they're useless. However, there are other areas of the country where they're really great to have, so feel free to use whatever stakes are great for the area you're in. And as I mentioned, I want to get some of those heavy-duty washers to put on these the nail spikes, because those plastic cones that come with them always seem to break, and I never remember until I'm out in the field trying to use them. Now, the last bag, as I mentioned, I haven't actually assembled it, but I have all the components I want to put in there, including the bag. Now, the bag I plan on using is it's a military bag. It's a large canvas bag. It's 2-foot cube, and I have kept tarps and a large parachute in there before, so I know it's got the space. I've got a large 12 by 24 foot tarp. This thing is a monster, and it's come in very handy. It's starting to get old. I've had it for probably at least 20 years now, and it was expensive, but it's really come in handy. And so I either need to patch this one up or just go ahead and get a new one. I have other tarps, various sizes, various colors. I've got some neat sheets. All this stuff gets packed because it's all highly useful. When you need tarps or waterproofing or whatever, this stuff just comes in handy. You can make shelters out of it. You can section off places in your tent as walls. You can, all sorts of stuff you can do with tarps. I also want to put some plastic sheeting in there. It's commonly called visqueen. Put a roll of that in there. The neat sheets are great because they're kind of like cloth, but they're kind of water resistant. They're pretty good for like picnics and stuff where you don't want to be sitting on a scratchy, sweaty tarp. Although I got to tell you, I was just recently looking up the price of knee sheets lately because I noticed that one of mine, the one that I keep in my truck, has been heat damaged and it's got some tears in it and it's starting to fall apart. Those things are expensive. I think I bought mine for like $10. I found them on Amazon for $30, and I don't think that I'll be replacing because I didn't like them all that much. I thought they were kind of small for what they were, but they were nice because you didn't have to lay on a cold, sweaty tarp. But I don't think I'll be replacing these once these are gone. Other things I want to put in there, I've got some of these tarp clamps or clips or grippers. I prefer these over grommet kits. So if the grommet pulls out, these things like grab as part of the tarp, and you can, make them as an anchor point or a tie point. I just find the grommets, once they pull out, you're typically not wanting to use from that area, or you're going to want to fold over and grip with one of these grippers to kind of re-strengthen that. I don't have any, but there are things called these easy tarp holders. There's also super snaps. I think I've got a few of those. They work okay. These spread the tension across a greater area, and there's some other devices I've seen on the internet. But I like these. These are very easy to use. I find a lot of times the grommets aren't in the area where I want to tie off, and so you can use these grippers to put an anchor point anywhere on the tarp that you want. Last couple things to go in the tarp bag. One is some cordage. Tarps are always easier to use with cordage, so I'd probably put some parachute cord in there. I've got a bunch of it laying around, but I'm thinking for this bag, I'm just going to go out and buy a spool of 100 foot and just throw it in there. It doesn't take up much room. And tape. Duct tape is what I have. I don't particularly like it for use on tarps. It holds okay, but after a while, the layers of the duct tape start to come apart, and I'm just not really impressed with it. I've recently come across some tarp tape. I actually haven't used it yet. I'm looking forward to getting some and trying it because they claim that it's supposed to bond to the tarp and be a much better repair. So I know there have been some improvements in tapes and adhesives and stuff, so I'm hoping that this works far better than duct tape does. If you've used this, I'd be really interested in knowing what your experience is with it and how well it works. And something that doesn't fit into the bag, but it's really handy to use. I've got several of them. I like them a lot, and that is extendable poles. These are about 4 or 5 feet tall, and they almost double by pulling a piece out of the center. Very handy to have. You can hold up a tarp if you don't have any trees, or if you have trees on one side and not the other, you can use the poles to hold the tarp up. Quite handy. I like them. They don't fit in the bag, but it is something I typically grab when I do go out to the field. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of the podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to download and listening to it. You can reach me through the website at thepreparednesspodcast.com. You can also look us up on Facebook at facebook.com/preparednesspodcast. You can follow us on Twitter as Prepcast. And, of course, you can always email me directly at rob@prepcast.info. Until next time, enjoy life and be safe.